The air in the Mercy General Emergency Room was a toxic cocktail. It smelled of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the faint, metallic tang of fear. Machines beeped a relentless, chaotic symphony. Voices, sharp with urgency or low with grief, cut through the din. In the middle of it all, Alara Vance felt like a ghost, a shadow drifting through a world that was too loud, too fast, too bright. She moved with a deliberate slowness that her colleagues mistook for incompetence. They saw her fumbling with an IV cart, her hands hesitating over a patient's arm, and they whispered. They called her Mousy Millie, the charity case the hospital was forced to keep on probation. Alara kept her head down. She focused on the tasks, the simple, menial ones she was usually assigned. Stocking supply closets, changing linens, taking vitals from the stable patients tucked away in the less critical corridors. She wore her scrubs a size too big, a shapeless blue uniform that helped her disappear. The long sleeves were a necessity, hiding the jagged, puckered scar that snaked up her left forearm, a permanent reminder of a life she had tried to bury in the quiet, anonymous halls of civilian medicine. That life had been loud. It had been filled with the thunder of rotors and the crack of gunfire. This life was supposed to be silent. It was supposed to be safe. But it wasn't safe. Not really. The danger here was different. It came not from bullets, but from whispers. It came from the contempt in a doctor's eyes. It came, most potently, from Mr. Marcus Thorne. Thorne was the CEO of Mercy General. He was a man carved from polished marble and quiet cruelty. To the hospital board and the local news cameras, he was a visionary, a brilliant administrator who had tripled profits in 5 years. To the staff, he was a tyrant. He walked the halls not like a leader, but like a predator inspecting his territory. His gaze missed nothing, and his judgment was swift and merciless. He saw patients not as people, but as accounts. He saw his staff not as healers, but as assets or liabilities on a balance sheet. And he had decided, from the moment he first saw her, that Alara Vance was a liability. He saw her hesitation, her downcast eyes, her quiet demeanor, and he smelled weakness. It was something he could not abide. He made it his personal mission to grind her down, to make an example of her. The day it all shattered began like any other. Thorne was on one of his infamous walkthroughs, a tour of terror designed to catch staff off guard. He moved with a pack of sycophantic administrators and ambitious department heads, all of them laughing a little too loudly at his dry, humorless jokes. Alara was trying to insert an IV line into an elderly woman, a 90-year-old with veins as thin and fragile as spun silk. The woman was dehydrated, her skin like paper. Alara had missed twice. Her hands, usually so steady in the quiet of her apartment, felt clumsy and foreign under the buzzing fluorescent lights. Thorne stopped. The entire entourage went silent. The air grew thick and cold. "What is the problem here, Nurse Vance?" His voice was deceptively soft, a silken thread that could garrote a man. Alara flinched. "Her veins are difficult, sir. You're just incompetent," he finished for her, his voice rising. He strode forward, snatching the needle from her hand. He shoved her aside, not with a gentle push, but with a hard, dismissive thrust of his shoulder that sent her stumbling back into a supply cart. A few nurses snickered. Maya, a young nursing student who had always been kind to Alara, looked at the floor, her cheeks burning with shame. Thorne turned to the elderly patient, his entire demeanor changing. He became the charming, confident doctor. "Don't you worry, dear. We'll have you feeling better in no time." He prepped the area with an exaggerated flourish, found a vein on the first try, and slid the needle in with theatrical ease. He taped it down and patted the woman's hand. Then he turned back to Alara. The mask was gone. His eyes were chips of ice. "You see that? That is how a professional does it, not with fumbling and excuses. You are a disgrace to this hospital's reputation." He leaned in closer, his voice a low hiss that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "You are on my last nerve, Vance. One more mistake, one more moment of hesitation, and you will be out on the streets so fast your head will spin. Am I clear?" Alara could only nod, her throat too tight to form words. She felt the burning stares of 24 colleagues. She saw the smug satisfaction on Thorne's face. She felt small, insignificant, broken. He swept away, his coterie trailing in his wake, and the ER returned to its normal rhythm. But for Alara, the world had tilted. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. Instead, she just stood there, clutching her scarred arm through her sleeve, and forced herself to become a ghost once more. An hour later, the world outside the hospital decided to break as well. A thick fog had rolled in off the bay, and on the interstate, a tanker truck jackknifed during rush hour. The result was a 20-car pileup, a mangled mess of steel and shattered glass. The call came in, and the ER shifted from controlled chaos to a full-blown battleground. The wail of sirens became a constant, overlapping scream. The automatic doors slid open again and again, admitting a flood of broken bodies. Paramedics shouted vitals over the din. Nurses and doctors became a blur of blue and green, moving with practiced, desperate speed. Thorne was in his element, standing at the central hub, directing traffic like a 4-star general. He pointed, he barked orders, his decisions instant and absolute. That one to Trauma 1. Get a chest tube in him. The woman with the headlock, she can wait. Send her to triage. Where's ortho? I need ortho in Bay 3. Now! He was prioritizing. A man in a suit with a severe compound fracture was rushed to surgery. A family with obvious top-tier insurance was given a private trauma bay. Then, amidst the carnage, a different kind of patient arrived. He was wheeled in on a gurney, a John Doe. He hadn't been in the pileup itself, but was found in a ditch 50 yards away, as if thrown from a vehicle or having stumbled from the wreckage. He was unconscious, his face battered and bruised. His clothes were ragged, soaked through with rain and mud. He had no wallet, no phone, no identification of any kind. He smelled of the street. Thorne glanced at the gurney, and his face curled in disgust. He saw a vagrant, a drain on his hospital's precious resources. "What's this?" he snapped at the paramedic. "Found him near the scene, sir. Unresponsive. GCS of 5. Vitals are dropping." Thorne waved a dismissive hand. "Another drain on the system. We don't have the beds for this. Stabilize him, do a basic workup, and ship him to county hospital. I want him out of my ER in 30 minutes. We need this bay for paying customers." The order was given. The John Doe was pushed into an overflow corner, a piece of human debris to be swept away. The nearest available nurse was ordered to prep him for transfer. That nurse was Alara. She approached the gurney, her heart heavy with the familiar weight of being assigned the hospital's unwanted tasks. She looked down at the man's face. It was swollen and bruised, but beneath the grime, there was a strength to his jawline, a discipline that even unconsciousness couldn't fully erase. He was younger than she first thought, maybe mid-30s. She began her work, her movements slow and methodical as always. She checked his vitals. His blood pressure was dangerously low, his heart rate erratic. As she began cleaning the cuts on his face and arms, her fingers, trained by years of battlefield triage, began to read the story his body was telling. The story was wrong. The bruising on his knuckles wasn't from a car crash. They were the marks of a fighter. The contusions on his forearms were defensive wounds. This man hadn't been a passive victim in an accident. He had been in a fight, a brutal one. Then she saw it. Tucked just under his jawline, almost hidden in the shadow of his ear, was a tiny puncture wound. It was no bigger than a pinprick, barely visible, with no surrounding inflammation. It wasn't a cut from glass or metal. It was a needle mark. Something cold and electric shot through Alara. A switch flipped deep in her mind. The timid, fumbling nurse receded. The ghost in the halls began to solidify. She gently lifted one of his eyelids. His pupils were pinpoint, unresponsive to the light. She checked his reflexes. They were sluggish, almost non-existent. She put her fingers to his neck, feeling the faint, spastic tremors in the muscle. She knew these signs. She had seen them once before, in a dusty, sun-baked village in a forgotten corner of the world. This wasn't head trauma from a car accident. This was poisoning. A sophisticated, fast-acting neurotoxin. Something military grade. Something designed to mimic a massive stroke or a catastrophic brain injury. Something that would never be detected by a standard hospital toxicology screen. County hospital wouldn't just be a death sentence. It would be the final, successful step of an assassination. For the first time in 3 years, Sergeant Alara Vance looked out from behind the nurse's eyes, and she saw a soldier in need of a medic. She moved. There was no hesitation now. She strode purposefully through the chaos of the ER, her path direct. People who were used to seeing her shuffle out of the way looked up in surprise at the sudden intensity in her posture. She found Thorne standing over a bank of monitors, barking orders. "Mr. Thorne." Her voice was clear, steady. It didn't waver. He didn't turn around. "What is it, Vance? Is your vagrant ready for his taxi ride to the gutter?" "Sir, the John Doe is not a car crash victim," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "He's been poisoned. I believe it's a cholinesterase inhibitor, an advanced one. His symptoms are classic. We need to run a full-spectrum tox screen and start him on a pralidoxime drip immediately. And we need to get him on a ventilator. His respiratory system is about to collapse." Thorne finally turned, a look of utter disbelief on his face. He stared at her as if she had just started speaking in tongues. Then he laughed. It was a short, ugly, barking sound. "Nurse Vance, are you a doctor now? Did you get your medical degree from a cereal box this morning? I'm running a mass casualty incident here, and you are wasting my time with your delusional fantasies about a homeless drunk." "Sir, I'm certain. Look at his pupils, the fasciculations." "I don't have time to look at anything," he snarled, stepping toward her, his face darkening with rage. "I gave you a direct order. Prep him for transfer to county. That is all. Are you incapable of following a simple instruction? Get out of my sight and do your job before I have security do it for you." He turned his back on her. The conversation was over. The man's fate was sealed. Alara stood there for a second, the roar of the ER fading into a dull hum. She looked at Thorne's back, a wall of arrogant certainty. She looked over at the corner where her patient, her soldier, was dying. She saw the gentle rise and fall of his chest begin to slow, to stutter. She had spent 3 years running from who she was. 3 years trying to be invisible, to be quiet, to be nothing. She had let them call her incompetent. She had swallowed the humiliation. She had accepted the scorn. She had done it all because she thought it would keep her safe, would keep the ghosts of her past at bay. But there was one thing she could not do. She could not stand by and watch a soldier die because of a man like Thorne. The oath she had taken wasn't to a hospital administrator. It was to the person on the gurney. She made a choice. With a calm that settled over her like a shroud, she turned and walked back to the John Doe. She grabbed the gurney. A young orderly tried to stop her. "Hey, he's supposed to be prepped for—" Alara didn't even look at him. "I'm taking him to imaging," she said, her voice imbued with an authority that stunned him into silence. He simply stepped aside. She didn't take him to imaging. She pushed the gurney down a less trafficked corridor, her eyes scanning. She found what she was looking for. Trauma Bay 6, currently empty. She wheeled him inside, slid the heavy door shut, and engaged the magnetic lock. For a few precious minutes, they were alone. Her mind was a whirlwind of calculations. The toxin had a half-life of about 90 minutes. He'd been down for at least an hour. She had minutes, not hours. The standard hospital antidote, atropine, would only manage the symptoms. It wouldn't reverse the binding agent. She needed something more, something specific. Pralidoxime was a start, but for the military-grade variant she suspected, she needed a third-generation chelation agent. A drug so specialized, so expensive, it was rarely stocked in civilian hospitals. But Mercy General, thanks to Thorne's obsession with prestige and cutting-edge tech, had a contract with the Department of Defense for disaster preparedness. She knew there was a small, climate-controlled storage unit in the sub-level pharmacy. A long shot. She needed access. Her nurse's credentials wouldn't be enough, but Sergeant Vance's credentials were still buried deep in her memory. She raced to the nearest computer terminal. Her fingers, no longer clumsy, flew across the keyboard. She bypassed the hospital's user interface, accessing the back-end system. A few lines of code, a string of commands she hadn't used in years, and she had administrative access. She navigated to the high-security pharmacy inventory. Her breath caught in her throat. There it was, a single crate, 6 vials. She forged a priority requisition order under the name of the head of surgery, flagging it for immediate delivery. Then she ran back to the trauma bay. The patient was crashing. A loud alarm started blaring from his monitor. His breathing had become shallow, agonal gasps. He was going into respiratory arrest. "Hang on, soldier," she whispered, her voice a low, urgent command. "Just hang on." She grabbed the intubation kit. She hadn't performed a field intubation in 3 years, but her hands knew the work. They moved with a fluid, terrifying precision that would have sent her colleagues into shock. She tilted his head, inserted the laryngoscope, visualized the vocal cords, and slid the tube home. First try. She attached the ambu bag and began breathing for him, one steady squeeze at a time, her eyes locked on the monitor, watching his oxygen saturation numbers slowly, painstakingly, begin to climb back from the brink. A loud, insistent banging started on the door. "Nurse Vance, open this door!" It was the charge nurse. Alara ignored it. A minute later, a pneumatic hiss sounded, and the door slid open. A pharmacy tech stood there with a small, refrigerated case. "Priority delivery for..." He looked at the chaos, the intubated patient, the blaring alarms, and his voice trailed off. Alara snatched the case from his hands. "Thank you. You're dismissed." She pulled out a vial and a syringe, her movements economical and swift. She drew up the correct dosage, a complex calculation of body weight and exposure time that she did in her head in seconds. She injected it directly into the IV line. The banging on the door started again, louder this time. It wasn't the charge nurse. It was the heavy fist of Marcus Thorne. "Vance, what in God's name do you think you're doing? Open this door right now!" There was a heavy thud, and the lock disengaged. Thorne burst in, his face purple with rage. He saw the intubation tube. He saw the exotic, unlabeled vial in her hand. He saw the patient, who was supposed to be halfway to county, being given the most advanced and expensive treatment in the hospital. His rage was volcanic. "What have you done?" he screamed, his voice echoing in the small room. "You are fired! Do you hear me? Fired! You are a reckless, insubordinate, dangerous menace." He lunged for her, not for the vial, but for her. He grabbed her arm, her scarred arm, and yanked, trying to pull her away from the patient. Pain, sharp and electric, shot up her arm, but she held her ground, shielding the IV line with her body. "Security!" Thorne bellowed into the hallway. "Get this woman out of my hospital! Get her out of my sight!" 2 burly security guards rushed in. They saw the CEO pointing a trembling finger at the mousy nurse. They didn't ask questions. They each grabbed one of Alara's arms and began to drag her away. "You can't," she pleaded, not for her job, but for the man on the gurney. "He needs the full course of treatment. You have to monitor his..." Her words were cut off as the guards hauled her out into the main ER. The cacophony of the mass casualty incident died down, as every head turned to watch. They saw the quiet, incompetent nurse being physically dragged out, her feet scraping against the linoleum. They saw Thorne standing in the doorway of the trauma bay, his chest heaving, his face a mask of triumphant fury. They threw her out onto the curb. The automatic doors slid shut behind her. A moment later, one of the guards reappeared and tossed a clear plastic bag at her feet. It contained the contents of her locker: a worn paperback, a spare set of scrubs, and a small, framed photo of a smiling group of soldiers in desert camouflage. The rain began to fall, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked her thin uniform in seconds. Alara Vance sat on the wet concrete, the sounds of the city and the distant sirens blurring into a meaningless drone. She had failed. She had broken her silence. She had shown her hand. And for what? She had been cast out, and the man inside was likely going to die anyway, as soon as Thorne ripped out the IV and put him on a gurney to county. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from the cold, but from the crushing weight of utter defeat. An hour passed. The rain intensified, plastering her hair to her scalp. The flow of ambulances had slowed. She was just another piece of forgotten debris on the city streets. She saw a bus approaching and fumbled in her pocket for change, thinking only of getting back to her small, empty apartment. That's when she heard it. It was a sound that didn't belong in the city. A low, rhythmic whoomp, whoomp, whoomp that grew steadily louder, vibrating in her bones. It was the sound of heavy rotors, a sound from her past. She looked up. Descending from the low, gray clouds were 2 helicopters. They were sleek, black, and completely unmarked. They weren't news choppers or police air support. They They were military, and they weren't heading for the hospital's helipad. They were coming straight for the interstate. With a terrifying roar of their engines, the two aircraft landed directly on the highway in front of the hospital entrance, their landing skids screeching on the asphalt. Traffic came to a dead stop. Doors flew open, and figures began to rappel down ropes with silent, fluid efficiency. They were soldiers. Dressed in black tactical gear, helmets with night vision mounts flipped up, carrying weapons that made the police officers on scene look like toy soldiers. They moved as a single, disciplined unit, securing the perimeter, their movements economical and deadly. The ER doors slid open, and Thorne stepped out, his face a mixture of confusion and outrage. He started shouting at the nearest soldier. "What is the meaning of this? This is a civilian hospital! You have no jurisdiction here! I am the CEO of—" The leader of the team, a tall man with a face like carved granite and the eagles of a colonel on his collar, strode right past him as if he were a piece of furniture. He didn't even break stride. He entered the ER, his boots silent on the polished floor. The entire emergency room fell silent. Doctors and nurses froze, their hands hovering over patients. The only sound was the beeping of the machines. The colonel held up a small tablet. On the screen was a grainy black and white image. It was a security camera still from inside Trauma Base 6. It showed Alara, her face a mask of concentration as she worked on the John Doe. "I am looking for this woman." The colonel's voice was a low rumble, but it carried to every corner of the room. "She is the nurse who treated the patient brought in from the highway accident, the John Doe. We have reason to believe she saved his life. Her codename is Angel. Where is she?" A collective gasp went through the staff. They stared at the image, then at each other. Angel? This was Mousy Millie, the incompetent probationer. Thorne scoffed, recovering his bluster. "That woman? Her name is Vance, and I fired her an hour ago. She's a liability who performed an unauthorized, reckless procedure on a vagrant. Frankly, you should be arresting her, not looking for her." The colonel slowly turned his head, and his eyes, cold and gray as a winter sea, fixed on Thorne. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You fired her?" he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He tapped his earpiece. "Find her. Now." Outside, at the bus stop, Alara watched the scene unfold with a sense of dawning, terrifying unreality. A black, up-armored SUV detached from the military convoy and screeched to a halt directly in front of her. The passenger door opened. The colonel stepped out, his eyes scanning the street until they locked onto her. He walked toward her, his expression unreadable. He stopped a few feet away, ignoring the rain that dripped from his helmet. "Nurse Vance?" he asked, his voice softer now. Then a flicker of recognition crossed his face as he looked at her more closely. "Sergeant Vance? Alara Vance?" The name, her rank, spoken aloud after so long, was like a physical blow. She looked up at him, her past crashing into her present with the force of a tidal wave. She recognized him then, from briefings, from a command tent in a faraway desert. "Colonel Maddox," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He offered her a hand. "The man you treated, your John Doe. His name is Master Sergeant Alex Ryder. He's a Tier 1 asset. He's alive because of you. The doctors you have here were about to transfer him. They undid your work." He paused. "We need you to finish the job, Sergeant. We need you to save him." He helped her to her feet. The timid nurse, soaked and shivering on a city curb, was gone. As she stood up, she squared her shoulders. The ghost was gone. The soldier was back. "Let's go," she said. The return to the ER was a moment frozen in time. The Special Forces team parted for her, forming a protective wedge as she walked through the doors. Colonel Maddox was at her side. Every eye was on her. The whispers were no longer of ridicule, but of stunned, open-mouthed awe. Her former colleagues shrank back, avoiding her gaze. Thorne stood in the middle of the floor, his face a contorted mask of disbelief and sputtering rage. "What is this? You cannot be serious. She is not qualified. She is a fired employee. I forbid this." Colonel Maddox didn't even look at him. He addressed the entire ER staff. "As of this moment, this hospital is under temporary military authority. Sergeant Vance is in command of all medical decisions regarding Master Sergeant Ryder. She has my full authority. Anyone who interferes will be charged with obstructing a federal operation of the highest priority." Then he finally turned his gaze to Thorne. It was utterly devoid of mercy. "As for you," Maddox said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, "you are relieved of your position. Your credentials and access are revoked. You will not speak to any staff. You will not touch any equipment." He nodded to two of his soldiers. They moved forward, flanking Thorne. "Secure him. He is now a person of interest in the attempted assassination of a United States military officer." "You can't do this to me!" Thorne shrieked, his composure finally shattering completely. "I am a respected member of this community. I will have your careers. I will sue the entire United States government." The soldiers ignored his threats, each taking an arm in a grip of steel. They escorted him, still protesting, to a small office and shut the door. The king had been deposed. Alara paid none of it any mind. She was already moving, striding toward Trauma Bay 6. "Report," she snapped at the doctor, who had been about to transfer Ryder. The doctor, a man who had sneered at her just hours before, now stammered. His pressure dropped. We were, following Mr. Thorne's orders." "You were following the orders of an idiot," Alara said, not breaking stride. "Get me a full crash cart, a portable ventilator, and the rest of those vials from the pharmacy. Now." The doctor and nurses scrambled to obey, their movements clumsy in their haste. Inside the bay, Ryder was fading again. The initial dose of the antidote was wearing off. Alara went to work, a whirlwind of focused, efficient energy. She re-established the drip, recalibrated the monitors, and barked a series of complex orders for medications and equipment. The staff, who had once seen her as slow and incompetent, could now only watch in amazement as she performed a dozen tasks at once, her knowledge of advanced trauma care clearly exceeding that of anyone else in the room. She was no longer just a nurse. She was a commander. Once Ryder was stabilized, Colonel Maddox pulled her into an adjacent room, now secured by two of his men. "You need to know what you've stepped into, Alara." "I have an idea, sir," she replied, her eyes not leaving the monitor that showed Ryder's vitals. Ryder was deep undercover, Maddox explained, his voice low. He was tracking a rogue biochemist named Pharaoh, who developed a new generation of nerve agent. It's undetectable by conventional means. Pharaoh was selling the formula to a mercenary outfit, the same people who grabbed Ryder. They injected him, not just to kill him, but for a secondary purpose. He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. The toxin is bonded with a microscopic data tag. It's a tracking device, but it also contains a compressed file of all the intelligence Ryder gathered. Pharaoh's location, his buyers, everything. The antidote you administered is neutralizing the poison, but it's also slowly degrading the data tag. We have a window of maybe 2 hours to extract him and the data before the tag either fails or the mercs use it to pinpoint our exact location. Alara processed this. "So we're a target. This whole hospital is a target." "Exactly," Maddox confirmed. "Which is why we can't stay here." Meanwhile, in the small office where he was being detained, Marcus Thorne was not idle. The soldiers had taken his phone, but they hadn't found the small burner phone he kept strapped to his ankle, his emergency line to his more unsavory business partners. He was a man drowning in debt from a series of disastrous investments. The bribe he had taken to look the other way, to ensure any accidents involving certain individuals were swiftly and quietly dealt with at his hospital, was his only lifeline. He knew who Ryder was. Not his name, but he knew he was the package he was paid to make disappear. With trembling fingers, he dialed a number. "It's me," he whispered into the phone. "The package is still here. He's alive. An army of some kind has shown up. They've taken over. You have to get him out of here. And the nurse, the woman who saved him, she has to go." He gave them the floor, the room number, a way in through the laundry service tunnels. He gave them everything. The attack came 15 minutes later. It was subtle, not a frontal assault. A man dressed in the blue scrubs of an orderly pushed a linen cart onto the floor. No one gave him a second glance in the confusion. He moved with a quiet purpose, his eyes scanning the room numbers. He stopped outside the secured trauma bay. He reached into the cart, under a pile of dirty sheets, and his hand emerged with a pistol fitted with a long, thick suppressor. Inside, Alara was monitoring Ryder's neurological responses. She was standing by the IV pole, making a minute adjustment to the drip rate. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a distorted reflection in the curved metal surface of the pole. It was a sliver of the hallway, warped and bent. In it, she saw the door handle begin to turn, slowly, silently. The two soldiers guarding the door were on the other side of the hall, watching the main entrance. Instinct, honed by years in combat zones, took over. There was no thought, only action. "Down!" she screamed. In one fluid motion, she shoved the heavy gurney with all her might. It rolled sideways just as the door swung open. 3 silenced shots, little more than sharp coughs, hissed through the air where Ryder's head had been a second before, punching neat black holes in the wall. The assassin stepped into the room, his weapon sweeping toward the new position of the gurney. Alara didn't hesitate. She grabbed a heavy, stainless steel medical tray from a nearby stand and flung it like a discus. The tray spun through the air and caught the assassin square in the face with a sickening crunch. He staggered back, disoriented, his aim thrown off. That was all the time Maddox's soldiers needed. They were on him in a flash, a blur of black tactical gear. The fight was over in seconds. The hospital was compromised. Maddox grabbed his radio. "Pack it up. We're blowing this popsicle stand. Now. Evac Plan Delta." The escape was a controlled, violent ballet. The team formed a moving perimeter around Ryder's gurney. Alara was at his head, manually bagging him, her eyes constantly scanning his vitals on the portable monitor. She was no longer just the medic. She was the mission's core. She barked orders at the heavily armed soldiers. "Watch the jostling. Keep him level. I need a clear path. Now." They moved through the hospital corridors, a living fortress of steel and medical expertise. Alarms blared. Civilians screamed and dove for cover. They burst out of a side entrance into the rainy chaos of the street. An armored medical transport vehicle was waiting, its engine roaring. They loaded Ryder into the back, the doors slamming shut just as the first sirens of the local police began to converge on the scene. The transport peeled out, tires squealing on the wet pavement, flanked by the 2 other military SUVs. They sped through the city, leaving Mercy General and Alara's old life behind in a blur of flashing lights. "Where are we going?" Alara shouted over the roar of the engine. "Off the grid," Maddox yelled back from the front seat. "An old decommissioned ranger station in the mountains. No electricity, no network. If they're tracking us electronically, they'll lose the signal once we hit the park." They drove for an hour, climbing higher into the thickly forested mountains as the city lights vanished behind them. The rain turned to a torrential downpour, turning the narrow dirt road to the station into a river of mud. The station itself was a relic, a single-story wooden structure that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. It was cold, damp, and smelled of pine needles and decay. It was the perfect place for a siege. The mercenaries, led by the coordinates from Thorn, were not far behind. They were professionals, equipped with night vision, thermal imaging, and a ruthless efficiency that matched Maddox's own team. They swept the area, found the tire tracks, and began to close in. Inside the station, Alara worked by the harsh, focused beams of tactical flashlights. She had Ryder hooked up to the portable monitors, their batteries the only source of power. She was running low on the antidote. The final vial was hanging now, its precious contents dripping slowly into Ryder's arm. "He's stabilizing," she reported to Maddox. "The toxin is almost fully purged, but he's weak. Moving him again could kill him." Just then, the team's perimeter sensor, a small wireless device placed down the road, sent a silent alarm to the tablet Maddox was holding. "Contact," he said, his voice grim. "They're here." The first shot shattered the night. A high-caliber round from a sniper rifle punched through a window and embedded itself in the wall just inches from Alara's head. She didn't even flinch. She just shielded Ryder's body with her own. The ranger station erupted into a war zone. The windows exploded inward in showers of glass. Bullets tore through the thin wooden walls, splintering beams and sending dust motes dancing in the flashlight beams. Maddox's men returned fire, their weapons spitting controlled bursts of flame into the darkness. Alara was on the floor, trying to keep the IV line from being ripped out, talking to Ryder, who is now drifting in and out of consciousness. "Stay with me, Master Sergeant," she commanded, her voice calm and steady amidst the deafening roar of the firefight. "That's an order." A weak smile touched his lips. "Yes, ma'am," he rasped. One of Maddox's soldiers went down. A cry of pain cut short as a round caught him in the leg. Alara crawled to him, ignoring the bullets zipping over her head. She opened her field kit, a treasure trove of trauma supplies she had insisted on bringing. In less than a minute, she had a tourniquet on his thigh, stopping the bleeding, and had packed the wound. She was a combat medic in her element. The fight raged on. The mercenaries were trying to pin them down, to overwhelm them with superior numbers and firepower. A heavy thud sounded against the back wall, followed by the hiss of a chemical fuse. "Gas!" Maddox screamed. Alara reacted instantly. She grabbed the ambu bag, disconnected it from the ventilator, and held it tight to Ryder's face, forcing clean air into his lungs while the tear gas filled the room. The gas burned her own eyes and throat, but she didn't stop, her rhythm steady, her focus absolute. They were losing. They were pinned down, outnumbered, and running out of ammunition. A mercenary, thinking the inhabitants were incapacitated by the gas, smashed through a back window and clambered inside. He raised his rifle, pointing it toward the downed soldier. There was no time to think. The soldier's sidearm lay on the floor near her. Alara lunged for it. Her hand closed around the familiar weight of the grip. She brought it up, sighted down the barrel with an instinct that had never left her, and squeezed the trigger twice. Crack! Crack! The 2 rounds hit the mercenary's center mass. He dropped without a sound. In the sudden, ringing silence that followed, everyone stared. Maddox, his men, even Ryder, his eyes now wide open and fully conscious, stared at the mousy nurse from the ER, who now held a smoking pistol with the unshakable grip of a seasoned killer. The warrior was back. The standoff was broken by the distant but rapidly approaching sound of more helicopters. This time, it was the cavalry. Maddox's reinforcements had arrived. The remaining mercenaries, realizing they were outgunned, faded back into the forest. The next morning, the world felt surreal. Alara sat in the back of a military transport, Ryder, now stable and awake, on a gurney beside her. They had retrieved the data. The mission was a success. On a small tablet, they watched a live news feed. Marcus Thorne, having been released by the local police pending investigation, had called a press conference. He stood at a podium in the lobby of Mercy General, his face a mask of practiced solemnity. He was spinning his narrative. A tragic, violent incident brought to our doorstep by a disturbed and unstable employee, Alara Vance, he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Her reckless actions endangered patients and staff, and appear to be linked to a gang-related altercation that followed her from the hospital. We are cooperating fully with authorities to ensure that she is brought to justice for the chaos she caused. Ryder looked at Alara. He's burying you. He can try, she said, her voice quiet. Just as Thorne was about to take questions, the main doors of the hospital lobby swung open. A phalanx of federal agents entered, followed by Colonel Maddox. Between them walked a man in a crisp, dark blue uniform, his shoulders heavy with the 4 stars of a full admiral. And beside the admiral, dressed in clean military fatigues, walked Alara. The cameras swung around. A wave of murmurs and gasps went through the assembled press. Thorne froze at the podium, his mouth hanging open, his face draining of all color. The admiral stepped up to the microphone, gently but firmly moving Thorne aside. He didn't even look at the disgraced CEO. He addressed the cameras, his voice resonating with decades of command. "My name is Admiral Harrison. This morning, federal agents, in coordination with military intelligence, have uncovered a conspiracy of profound gravity." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "Mr. Marcus Thorne," he said, finally turning to look at the man, "is under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, treason, and accepting bribes from a hostile foreign entity in the attempted assassination of a United States military officer." Thorne began to stammer. This is absurd. An outrage. I am a respected—" "We have the recordings of your call, Mr. Thorne," the admiral said, his voice flat and cold. He nodded to an aide, who plugged a device into the sound system. Thorne's own panicked, whispering voice filled the lobby, giving away the location of Ryder and Alara, demanding her death. The press erupted into a frenzy of shouted questions and flashing cameras. Thorne looked around wildly, a cornered animal. "It's a lie! It's fabricated! She's the criminal! Her!" he shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Alara. 2 federal agents stepped forward and grabbed Thorne's arms, pulling them behind his back to cuff him. The facade of the powerful CEO crumbled into that of a pathetic, terrified man. "You can't do this," he wept. tears of rage and self-pity streaming down his face. "I have rights! I have a reputation!" He was dragged away, still screaming his innocence, a public and complete ruin. The Admiral turned back to the microphone. His gaze found Alara in the crowd. The real story today is not about a traitor. It is about a hero. He gestured for her to join him at the podium. This is Sergeant Alara Vance, a former Special Operations Combat Medic, a recipient of the Silver Star for Valor, who ran through enemy fire to save 3 wounded soldiers, an action that resulted in injuries that ended her military career. She came to this hospital seeking peace and was met with ridicule. Yesterday, her training and her courage saved the life of Master Sergeant Ryder and protected intelligence vital to our national security. Her name has been cleared, and her nursing license, which was unjustly suspended, has been fully reinstated with honors. The lobby was silent for a moment, and then someone started clapping. It was Maya, the young nursing student. Tears streamed down her face as she applauded. Then another nurse joined in, then a doctor, then the entire room, press included, was filled with a thunderous ovation. The colleagues who had mocked her, who had called her Mousy Millie, now clapped the loudest, their faces a mixture of awe and deep, profound shame. After the press conference, in a quiet hallway, the Admiral approached Alara. "Sergeant," he said, his tone respectful, "the intelligence you and Ryder secured has already led to the capture of Pharaoh and his entire network. The country owes you a debt it can never fully repay." "I just did my job, sir," she said simply. "Well, about that," the Admiral said, a rare smile touching his lips. "We're putting together a new unit, a small, elite, rapid response medical team designed for high-threat extractions and deep field assignments. It needs a commander, someone with a very unique, very specific combination of skills, someone who knows both medicine and warfare. The position is yours, if you want it." Alara looked past him, through a window, to the city outside. For 3 years, she had tried to be someone else. She had tried to silence the warrior inside her, but she knew now that was impossible. It was who she was. A television in a nearby waiting room was replaying the press conference. On the screen, she saw a shot of Master Sergeant Ryder, watching from his military hospital bed. As the camera zoomed in, he looked directly into the lens and gave a slow, respectful nod. It was a message meant only for her. Alara turned back to the Admiral. For the first time in years, a genuine smile, bright and confident, touched her lips. She stood a little taller, the ghost of Mercy General banished forever. "I accept, sir," she said. She walked away from the cameras, away from the whispers and the pity, away from the life that had been a cage. She walked toward the black military vehicle waiting for her at the curb, toward a future where she would never have to hide again. She was not Nurse Vance. She was not Mousy Millie. She was Sergeant Alara Vance, and she was going home. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content, and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. The story of Alara Vance teaches us a powerful lesson about judging others. It shows that true strength and character are often hidden beneath a quiet surface. People who seem meek or incompetent might be carrying burdens or hiding skills we can't even imagine. It's a reminder that a person's worth is not defined by their job title or the opinion of an arrogant authority figure like Mr. Thorne. True strength is about doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when you're scared, and even when it costs you everything. Alara's journey is a classic case of vindication, proving that courage and integrity will always triumph over arrogance and corruption in the end. Doing the right thing always, always pays off. Never judge a book by its cover, because you might just be looking at a hero. What did you think of today's story? What would you have done if you were in Alara's shoes? Would you have risked your job and your safety to save a stranger? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support means the world to us and helps us create more content like this for you to enjoy. Have a nice rest of your day.